What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Bryan and myself are going to be digging into our favorite supersets for each body part. This was originally posed to Bryan as a question on Instagram, and we thought it would be a fantastic topic to branch out into its own podcast episode. But before we jump into these supersets, Bryan, what's going on, my man?
Hey, dude, it's early again. It's like, 6 a.m. Mountain Time. So we're hanging out. We're okay. I was just telling you off air that my daughter was up not feeling too great last night until like 11-ish. So I didn't fall asleep till after 11 and then up at 5 for the podcast. So I'm moving a little slow this morning, but we're here. Got a few cool updates for everybody this weekend. We are taking a family trip to a place called Grand Lake in Colorado, which is kind of near Rocky Mountain National Park. So maybe without a kid that is 2 years old and 4 years old, we'd be able to do some cool hiking and exploring and stuff. But there's like a really big lake and the weather's supposed to be really nice. So maybe we'll do a little boating and just kind of get out and explore a little bit. Nothing too crazy, but always fun to get away from the daily routine. So that's coming up this weekend. I don't know if I'm going to be that crazy guy that brings his scale. So we'll see if I have my weigh-ins or not posted each day, or whether I just decide to take 3 days off and then move forward from there. The only drawback to that I really hate is that the weekly average gets super jacked up and messes up my data. So there's like a small piece of me that wants to be that guy and bring my scale, but we'll see how it plays out. You guys will know shortly. Let's see what else. I just recorded a bomb episode with Jordan Lips yesterday. We had a whole episode basically about lengthened overload and training at long muscle lengths and reverse drop sets and partials. And we talked for like an hour about that stuff. So, if that's your cup of tea, that episode should be coming out here in the next few weeks. My guess is that that's probably going to be one of his lowest listened to episodes, because I don't know that many people that want to listen to an hour about lengthened overload, but I'm sure there's a few of you guys out there. So it might be fun. What else, man? So my diet is just, I am crushing things right now. I'm in week 9 and just dropped 2 pounds to a new low of 184.8 yesterday. This morning woke up, and even though I only slept 6 hours and was out of my routine and didn't get my whole morning routine in, it was 185.2. So less than half a pound up from yesterday, and things were awry. So I'm just like chugging right along. It makes me think about like the delayed effect of calorie intake on body weight, because I cut my calories down to like 2,600, 2,500 range, 25 to 2,700. We'll say 2,600 average. I did that a couple weeks ago, and the scale, it like creeped down, and it like had one day where it went to like 185 and a half, and then it went back up to like 186 and a half, and then 187, and then 186. And it kind of did the thing that it does. And I haven't really changed anything. It just now is 2.5 pounds lower than that. So it's just wild how some of these things do have delays and kind of take a while to catch up. And then you got any thoughts on that? It just is what it is.
I do. Just as someone who does a lot of dieting with people, you see it. You see the type of clientele who week 1, you pull calories and things start moving. I'm one of those people personally. But I have like 2 or 3 clients right now where we pulled like a solid 400 or 500 calorie chunk per day from like when we started, and their weights kind of barely budged for the first like 12 to like 20 days. And now things are really moving, but everyone's kind of different. I don't know yet what may influence that. I have some thoughts around like insulin sensitivity and metabolic flexibility and different things like that of potentially why, but I don't have anything concrete. Anything I would say would be purely conjecture at this point.
Do you see a difference in your clients between the ones that have that issue like initially when you start the diet, like from the get-go, it's the first couple weeks where the drop doesn't happen, versus someone like me in, 9 weeks into the diet and I drop calories, but nothing happens for a few weeks, and then boom, there's like this big like whoosh effect type thing?
Yeah, same thing. So I mean, some people it takes a little bit, and then like we'll drop. Like some like one person, we were kind of just this, or I guess it was last week. We had a couple weeks where kind of like stagnant, and I had some notes on my end. I'm like, okay, if our average this next week is above threshold X, I need to drop calories again. And this week the average was down like almost 3 pounds, which is large comparatively. He's only like in the like low 190s, high 180s, so a large single week shift. But yeah, it is, like I said, as someone who works with a bunch of different people, it's there isn't anything that I have found yet to be like a solid rhyme or reason as to why some people it's like clockwork, other people there's like a delayed effect. And then the same thing with people after like a post, let's say like like a diet break or something like that, or maybe like a work trip or something like that, where they come back, weights up, maybe 2 or 3 pounds. Some people over the next like 3-4 days, it drops drastically day over day. Some people will hang up there for like a week, 9 days before it finally gets moving again. And it's, I wish I knew. And I mean, my hope is at some point I will in the future know more around the specifics of that, but it is interesting why you just have to kind of trust that what you're doing is working and then give it enough time before prematurely remaking more adjustments.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question is like, I'm sure it's variable, but like middle of a diet, how long do you wait? Like if you're targeting 1 pound a week and you think that you're at like, a deficit that should equal a pound a week, and say the scale is like 0.2 pounds down, then the next week it's like 0.4 pounds down. Like how many weeks or how long do you generally wait before you're like, okay, we're not achieving the like weekly targets that we're hoping to achieve and we need to make a bigger drop?
Yeah. So what's been really fantastic, I haven't talked about this on the podcast, I don't think yet. In April, I wrapped up 2 new tools that I use for my coaching, my fat loss and muscle gain models. And they're like these big Google Sheets models based off, it's based off a few studies, but that big landmark one with, that was like Dr. Eric Helms, I think Alan Aragon, where it was like a meta on like recommendations for like natural bodybuilding,
Yeah, I remember
stuff.
that. Yep.
So, I mean, it really comes down to like 0.5% to 1% total body mass, like loss per week is the goal. So I kind of map all that stuff out and then see, okay, based on where this client is, what their starting body weight is, where they're currently at, what that looks like. So when things are not moving within that threshold, if they're slow, it could be relative to our initial or current even estimated percent of calorie deficit. So like I have a client right now, when he came to me, he came from another coaching company who had him on like super low calories for a really long time. And he was doing CrossFit. And I was like, and then we were kind of upside down, like kind of skinny fat. Calories had been low. I'm like, well, we got to reverse for a while. You're probably going to put on some body fat. It's kind of like, hey, we need to fix this now. And then eventually we'll deal with it later type of thing. We're taking a super conservative approach. So as long as we are kind of like treading that low rate of loss, like I am happy. I told him, hey, we're going to be in this for 4 or 5, maybe 6 months of dieting, but we're going to take it slow. We're going to make sure biofeedback's really, really good sort of thing. So in that, I'll give it a little bit more time. It could be like, hey, another thing I find is like some people, I put them at like approximately 10% to calorie deficit and things start moving. Other people really don't start until we start crossing that like 20 to like 22% estimated threshold. So it could really be that too. Like how low is your calorie deficit under your estimated maintenance? Different people move at different levels. That is where I really think things like training intensity, quality of sleep, other things come into play there. But really, I'll give someone like kind of 4 weeks before generally readjusting, especially if there are other lifestyle mediated factors that we need to look into. Like, does food quality really look like it should? Like, are we really putting our best foot forward on multiple fronts before slashing calories again?
Nope, I totally agree with that. Yeah. I always find myself, at least with myself, getting jumpy at like the 10-day mark. Like if I don't see some movement, like something happening by 10 days, I'm like, ooh, got to make an adjustment. I don't want to be behind the 8 ball type thing. But a lot of that also plays into the things that I know are going on in my own life. Like you said, like the other factors that are happening and things like that. So
Yeah, it's
Cool.
also the
Well,
reason I don't coach myself.
yeah.
For that
No,
very
it's,
reason, because you're emotionally invested and it
yeah,
clouds, what other would be otherwise normal judgment. Like I get it. I get it for sure, which is going to lead
yeah.
us into one of my updates here in a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit.
totally. Real quick, let me actually. Why don't you jump into that update, and then I'll hit my training updates and stuff after that.
Yeah, let's do it. So I officially started with a coach today. I'm working with Alex Bush of Physique Development. I got over my plan and everything like that. I'm super, super pumped about it. I what I'm really excited about, and this is what I was just talking with Bryan about. I know for myself, I know this. It's basically human nature. It's hard to coach yourself because of the emotional investment, right? Same thing with like people who kind of like investing, right? When you're investing with your own money, it kind of would like cloud your judgment a little bit because it's your own money. Whereas if you're just like investing someone else's money, like you just follow the playbook sort of thing. Like you don't have that emotional attachment. I am a kind of a crappy coach for myself because I like to think that I am special and I can get away with things. And it just kind of comes from like laziness of like, I coach a bunch of different people. Like the last thing I want to do at the end of the day when I'm done coaching my client roster is actually do my own coaching, right? So it always just gets put on the back burner and I half-ass it. And then also I really, really like it because it makes me feel kind of like an athlete again. It brings back that like youth, that client, or I guess like player coach relationship dynamic. So I always want to submit really, really good check-ins. I want to be a really good client. So it just brings out a best version of me. So I'm super, super excited. And two, it gets me away from my confirmation biases. So we are starting me in a neurological phase. And that's something that like I'm never going to program for myself because it's just I just wouldn't do it. So it's cool to have someone else kind of steering the ship, and I get to learn some new things on the programming side. I'm really, really excited about it, and we're going to go into like a little calorie deficit too, just because it's like, well, technically it's winter here, but I just want to be in good shape for summer and like have fun, and it's great for marketing and that sort of shit, which I will have zero qualms about. And two, it's easier, right? When you need to, when I'm basically not, I'm cooking my breakfast. Everything else is getting outsourced. It's easier to eat less than it is to eat more. This is one of those things where we, being the United States is bar none anywhere else in the world in terms of grocery stores and food availability and stuff. So when you go other places, it's harder to source things. And when like my carbs, when I was doing it myself were at 500 a day. Like it's hard to eat 500 carbs of rice and shit per day. You can only do so much oats before it really slows down your digestion and stuff. So it's literally easier for me to diet than it would be to try and go into like an actual muscle building phase or anything like that. So that's a start there, and I'll keep reporting on updates each week and stuff. But I'm pumped about it. It gives me something to really like put forth my best effort for in terms of training and being adherent with my own nutrition, which is always fun.
I am super amped for this personally. I love this experiment. I love that Alex also comes from a bit of an N1 background, which I know is part of the reason that you chose him. But I love looking at these coaches that have that N1 influence and then kind of looking at the way that they make it their own. Because I've done a lot of that too, where I've taken a lot of influence from N1, but I've also got a lot of things that I'd like to think are mine or things that I've learned elsewhere. And it's cool to see another coach kind of do that similarly. So I'm excited for that from that perspective. And I'm also really curious how you guys landed on a neurological phase for the beginning here.
He had a pretty solid like client intake questionnaire and asked about training history and stuff. And I don't know the last time I've done less than like 8 reps on anything. Maybe certain things where I like fail a little bit early and do like 7, but it's been 7 to, the 20 for, I literally don't know. It's been probably 2 years or something like that. So just by some of that history, it's like, okay, well, I haven't really tried to push any of these adaptations in a really long time. This is a great place to start. That is the assumption that I am making, but I really just said, hey, I'm hiring you. to be my coach. Treat me like, you would any other client, and what you say, I will do. Just steer the ship sort of thing. So this is where we landed, and it's cool. It's actually something that I saw. I'm like, oh, okay, different. And now I'm like, well, maybe it will be a little bit fun getting like strong in some lower rep ranges. Like I haven't really tried that in a really long time. So that's kind of how we landed.
How about the emotional attachment to barbell lifts? Are you not doing a strength phase with barbell lifts? Are they in there and you have to like separate that?
Some are in there. Like I know on my first day we have like a deadlift, like a conventional deadlift. And that is to kind of pre-exhaust some of the hips and glutes. So then when we go into, oh boy, what is on that day? A rear foot elevated, front foot wedge split squat. It's going to be like my glutes are a little bit fatigued and I can use more quad like I should there. And then for a lot of it, it's not like there's no like barbell overhead press. Like hack squat is going to be my primary like heavy lift for the squat pattern. So it's not like I'm doing barbell bench press, barbell overhead press, or anything like that. It's just lower rep ranges of I guess what would be commonly referred to as more hypertrophic movements anyway.
But you're not necessarily doing like sets of 1 to 4 on a hack squat or a split squat, right?
No. I think for the first thing we're doing like if the hack from what I can remember off the top of my head, I think it's like the 6-6-4-4. So some of them will get lower, but I think 4 reps is the lowest. And I think only like 2 or 3 movements over the entire first week will touch 4 reps for a maximum of 2 sets.
And I'm guessing there's plenty of RIR there too, since it's neurological. Like you don't need to be pushing into those grindy reps. So if you're doing a set of 4, it's probably with like an 8 RM or something like that.
Yeah, and that's where I'm starting right now. It was like a 7 to 9 RPE was the instruction that I was given.
Which again, 7 to 9 RPE is a 1 to 3 RIR.
Well,
that's pretty close to failure.
True. I took everything today on the closer to the 3 end I just wanted to test everything out. And I'm like historically incredibly guilty for getting overzealous very early on. So I'm like really trying to do my best to do the opposite of what I historically do.
Yeah.
But I'm excited about it.
Very cool. I'm excited to hear the updates each week as well. Cool. So I have some training stuff to discuss here. I am in week 3 of my microcycle now, my hypertrophy microcycle, mesocycle, the whole thing. I'm just in week 3 of hypertrophy, which is awesome because that means that I'm now progressing into partials. So yesterday was my second session, adding some partials in. I've done them on leg curls. I did them on 45-degree hip extensions, and yesterday on a bunch of back movements as well. So that was fun. I've missed them because it was prior to this hypertrophy cycle. I had a 5-week metabolic phase where I didn't do any of the partials, reverse drop sets, anything like that. So this was really fun to get back into it. A workout that didn't make me feel anything really the prior week, adding in a few partials, and I felt it for a couple days, which was great. It was like that light, perfect, like lightly toasted soreness that you like. From there, I will be progressing probably into some reverse drop sets here in the next 2 weeks or so. So I'm excited about that as well. And then one of the things like Jordan and I talked about on the podcast yesterday at the very end was just this idea of like, well, if the length in position is the most important and you're so limited by the short position, like maybe the biggest sledgehammer is just to use a heavier weight and just do length and partials from the beginning instead of going full range of motion reps and then into the reverse drop set where it's like more partials. And so that's something I actually had been considering specifically for the 45-degree hip extension, because that movement for me, like I'm trying to make it a hamstring dominant movement where it's naturally going to be a glute dominant movement because of where the short position is. The glutes contract at the top. But there is a whole ton of hamstring involvement in like the bottom half of that movement. So there's like a large part of me that's Potentially excited about trying this idea of just doing really heavy, like 60% range of motion hip extensions and seeing what that does to the hamstrings versus kind of being limited by what the glutes can do at the top of the movement. So super excited about that. One other thing I've been ruminating on, and I didn't remember if I had brought it up on the podcast last week, but it's in my notes from last week. So I think I talked about it. Did I mention the kind of struggle I'm having between the pendulum squat and how challenging it is versus my linear hack squat and not having that in the program right now?
We did talk about that a little bit. Yeah. And you were contemplating putting the linear hack in.
Yeah, so I'm still contemplating it. It's literally like it's been on my mind for the last few days because today, right now, after this podcast, I drive my kid to school and then I come back and I work out and it's quad day today. So I'm like, the last few days as it's gotten closer, I've been like, oh, pendulum and oh, I really like my linear hack thing, and I think I'm gonna make the swap and go to the linear hack because I look forward to doing it more and it doesn't feel so daunting. And at this point where I am in my diet, I just don't know that I want the anxiety and stress of like having to go into the pendulum each week and not enjoy it. Whereas like the linear hack it just feels really good to me. Like I know because there's a hip flexion, it's potentially not quite as quad dominant, but then I drop my feet and I use the heel wedges and I get that like super steep shin angle. So I think it's arguable. I'd love to see some sort of analysis of which one for me is more quad dominant because I feel like they're both quite quad dominant, but I just enjoy it. Like I don't feel as intimidated by the linear hack. I enjoy it right now. And I think that I'm probably going to make that switch in this session today. So anyway, I'm glad that I just worked through that with you guys on air because I was still torn going into it.
One thing that I wanted to bring up, and I have a really kind of short thing that in my updates we'll talk about here too. This is like a perfect example of one of those situations where like, yes, on paper, right? If you were to set up like the, what is it? The EK? Is it the EKG or it's EMG? Where how they test EMG, If you were to set up that and stuff, I mean, it's pretty widely known. Like the pendulum is like the king of quad dominant or the most quad dominant exercise. However, within the context of like Bryan is in week 9, 10-ish of a calorie deficit at your training age, like you're not putting on new muscle. What you're trying to do is save as much as you can while you diet. Yes, on paper, the pendulum is objectively better. Would you performing the pendulum equate to any meaningful or tangible more muscle mass kept throughout your diet? I'm going to say probably no. It's a net push. And if you get less psychological, what's the word I'm looking for? Fatigue, or anguish from using the linear hack, it may even be considered a net positive because it's probably going to be a push from how much muscle you save by doing it anyway. So that's where one of these, contexts of where it's like the context matters so much because on paper, the answer is, pendulum. But in the context of what are you using it for, the answer probably becomes the linear hack.
Yeah. No, that's kind of the same thought process I went through. So I'm glad that you kind of see that the same way. And part of it being that I am dieting and that the fact that I'm not going to be building much muscle, like you said, it just seems like an opportunity cost that kind of is leaning in favor of that one. The one drawback that I'm a little bit bummed about with it is that those wedges that I bought from Prime are too big for me to use on my linear hack. So I can't like if I put them on there, my foot ends up going to the top of the platform and it becomes like a glute dominant movement, even though I'm using wedges. Whereas those little teeny rubber red wedges I have are like in the perfect position for me to get like maximal knee flexion, So I actually haven't even gotten to use the new wedges I bought yet because they also don't fit on the heel or the box that I'm using for my elevation on my split squats. So I actually think this week I'm going to try doing my split squats without the front foot elevated so high. I might just put them on a wedge, or put them on a wedge and then on like a plate or something like that. Something that will fit the wedge so that I can actually use it, because I think the split squat would be significantly benefited by having that steeper angle. Whereas the linear hack is actually, it's benefited more by having the smaller wedge. So anyway, those are two interesting things on my mind there. And I just like have this weird, crazy podcast week this week where I'm doing 5 of them. Today I have 2. I had 1 on Sunday, I had 1 on Monday, and then I had 2 today and 1 on Wednesday. So trying to get out of town here and doing all these podcasts and trying to get ahead on work and training, and then getting a shitty night of sleep last night. I'm a little all over the place, but I got through the updates. I have 2, I don't know if you saw it on the outline. I have 2 other like thoughts on my mind, but I'm actually going to save these for next week because I think they're bigger, like almost philosophical topics that we can delve into deeper next week maybe, versus wasting time on an episode here where we haven't even gotten to the same muscle group supersets yet. So let's jump into the rest of your updates, and then we'll move into the topic of the day.
We will push one of mine for next week too, because it is very akin to the sort of thought process of yours as well. That'll provide a good to rope them together. Cool. So the kind of last updates I have is I have really finally found my groove here in Bali, and it's made me like really, really happy to be here. This place just has it has a vibe and an energy to it that can be really, really like infectious, and it has hit me like full force, and it's one of those times, again, it happens in waves where I am just really, really stoked about life. I'm very, very grateful also. If we really wrap it up, like, Bryan, we're working right now. Like what we're doing right now is literally working. And I love that is, I'm able to say that, clients are doing well. I'm really, really excited with my services and in my positioning and the work that I'm doing. And then I've just been feeling like super, super grateful and wanted to share. And then also I have my meals all sorted, which is really cool too. So I'm really, really pumped about things. And then also a really, really cool thing. I love, so let me preface, I love Instagram, right? And I'm always interested in when I hear people say like Instagram's terrible because it's like ruining the world and all these things. And it really depends on how you look at it. But for me, it's brought me so many cool connections. Like I literally got a message like 4 or 5 days ago from this guy, and he was like, "Hey, Aaron, I listened to the podcast. I know before you said if you were in the same city or whatever to like reach out to you, but I'll be in Bali next week. That I heard you're in Bali. If you want to meet up and lift weights, let me know." And I was like, hell yeah, I do. So I went, today, met up with this guy, Barton. He's from Australia, listens to the podcast, and we lifted weights for like 90 minutes and just like bullshitted and met someone new and had an absolutely fantastic, time. So it's like without Instagram and things like these things would never happen. So it's just, I love it. And it's super, super cool to just get to meet people in real life through connections like the podcast and stuff. And it is just really, really sweet. And I'm just really pumped about things and happy to be spending my time doing what I'm doing. So that is my last update about just being rather joyous around the things going on, which is cool. You want to talk about some supersets?
Yeah, real quick. That is really cool that you got to do that, and the fact that the gratitude that you expressed for what we get to do. I actually talked to a buddy of mine here in Boulder about that a lot. He's a tech startup guy. And so like we both, we went skiing to A-Basin a couple weeks ago on like midday on a Wednesday or something, and it was just one of those things where we were sitting in the car and we're like, wow, how cool is this that, we're in our 30s and we're able to have created this life for ourselves that we can do that. So I feel that gratitude as well. And then I also had a cool opportunity to train with somebody that follows my Evolved programs. He's been a member for, maybe 2+ years at this point. But this guy, David, came over to my home gym and we trained together last week. We did quads together, and he's a local Boulder guy. So it was just cool. He hit me up and he was like, hey, I live here. I'd love to hang out and like do a workout and catch up and whatever. And so we got to do that too, which kind of similarly just feels really great.
Yeah, it's so cool. All right.
Sweet. So before we jump into supersets, I feel like this, are we assuming going into this that it's a mechanical damage type mesocycle or focus? Because I feel like the way you arrange a superset going short, long, or long, short, very much depends on kind of what the goal of the cycle is. So that would be maybe one piece of clarification for the listener first.
Yeah, we should definitely frame it up. I will also frame it up as like, personally, I'm not like a huge fan of supersetting like large muscle groups. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like arms, a lot of like, yes, some delts and stuff. Yeah, maybe some like complementary type stuff. But some of these, if I'm being really honest, like I would probably only program them with like a really short on time program or something like that. Or if I was like, or the context of like someone just has a ton of food and their life is so conducive for recovery and they're like super motivated and into it and we're just like swinging for the fences type thing. But many of these are more of like kind of pie in the sky, like fun things and more like exploratory, but wouldn't really make it into programs realistically for at like a large aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that for the most part. I find myself in the metabolic phases using a lot of, say, muscle group supersets as a excuse not to do the duration sets. So instead of doing like a set of 15 to 20 of one movement, you can do like 6 to 8 of one directly into 6 to 8 of the other. But when we're doing it for the purpose of the metabolic phase like that, it's usually two short movements, two short overloaded movements, or it would theoretically go from like a mid-range lengthened movement and then finish with a short movement so that the second movement being the one that's going to take the brunt of the stimulus. But when I got that question on Instagram, I took it from the perspective of this person being in like a hypertrophy phase or what you would call like mechanical damage, in which case it would kind of be the opposite order where it usually would take the form of something like a pre-exhaust where you would be going from a short overload movement and then finishing with that lengthened overload movement so that you would incur a little bit more of that kind of muscular tension stimulus damage from that second movement. So anyway, that's kind of the way that I think about this question, where there definitely is the purpose of going short, or lengthen short if you're doing a metabolic phase. I think we both maybe took it from that other perspective. Is that right?
Yeah, and something a third kind of avenue that I brought in is I try and be really pragmatic with programming. I would say maybe even more so than the average person. And when I'm putting together like supersets, I'm really taking into account like how realistic is this to do in a normal gym. So a lot of times I will pair like, you know, two movements on like the functional trainer. So, I mean, you're already there. You can obviously use it for the second thing, or, okay, both of these are going to use like an adjustable bench with dumbbells or something like that. So I really try and think about it from a pragmatic standpoint. I did have some assumptions going into this that it wasn't you alone in the gym with not a soul there and you could do, you know, whatever you wanted to type of thing.
Yeah. And I guess my caveat would be that I tend to think of it from the perspective of what's available in my home gym,
exactly,
which again is going to be limited compared to what a full gym would have. So I guess we each have some limitations on our prescriptions.
Agreed.
Yep. All right, cool. We'll starting with the chest area, the regions of the pecs.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of paired that with like anterior delts a little bit too, just for simplicity. So, I mean, with mine, what I would really like, what I do like to do is I love like a sternal cable press, like one that you have like your back supported, right? So think of it as like kind of like, yeah, just a seated cable press. You could set it up with like a functional trainer. There are some of those like Free Motion, right, who makes the functional trainers, kind of made those pieces that are specific to like a exercise you can do there. So I really like that. And then pairing that with like a weighted chest biased dip, so that sternal press is going to be shortened, biased, and then that weighted dip is going to be more lengthened. So that is one that I will do, and I really do like to do.
We almost chose the exact same thing because The one that I choose is the cable press thing that I do, which I think is exactly what you're talking about, where I'm seated up at like a mostly vertical angle, and then you can change which region of the pec is being stimulated by just raising the arms of the cable on the functional trainer. So I do two versions of it in my program right now. I have a costal one where the cables are coming from a little more like high to low. And then I have a clavicular one where they're coming from low to high. But you're talking about sternal, which is right in the middle. So we're basically speaking the same language here. My favorite one though is going from either sternal or costal, because the movement I'm going into is a deep deficit push-up, which I think is the exact same thing that you're saying, being the dip. I'll tell you what though, man, you say weighted dip. Coming from a short overloaded pec movement like that and then going into a deep deficit push-up, I don't even need any weight. I couldn't imagine if I was doing it with a dip that I'd be like needing to add weight to that one. I feel like 8 reps with body weight after, close to failure on a cable chest movement, and that's probably fine for me. But I love that superset. And if I could tell you the amount of times that I have racked my brain about how I could possibly set up dips in my home gym and tried things and failed and thought again and failed again. And I would love to have the option to do a dip because push-ups are just a little bit too easy for me. And I would love to have that kind of on-foot supported option to work the chest, but I don't, alas.
I guess it would be really important for me or for us, I should say, to provide like approximate repetition ranges for some of these too. Because with the one that I would say that sternal cable press in the like 8 to 10 area, and then that weighted dip, I was literally thinking like 4 to 6 where you would realistically fail. So if you wanted to do a little bit more, you're not going to be using weight, of course.
I think that's a great point, because I was thinking just 6 to 8 for both, 6 to 8 type thing. But I kind of like your approach better, where you're taking that like short overloaded movement when you're fresher to like a slightly higher rep range, but still not into like an endurance rep range. And then when you're going to this more compound, like lengthened overloaded movement, you get a lot out of those 4 to 6 reps because of the fatigue that's already present, that maybe you don't need to go to 6 to 8 or 8 to 10 to get that significant benefit from it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really like about dips too, is like some things you can be like, it's like my form breaking down and I could maybe get out a couple more. Like dips are like, nah, dog, like we're done here. You failed. Like they're done. So it's really easy to identify and kind of hold true there.
Yep. Cool. Well, talk to me about this lat superset that you have here. I'm intrigued by what you wrote down.
Yeah. So what I have here is a thoracic cable row. So basically, that is going to be coming from the cable origin would be a little bit lower, and you're rowing kind of up at a little bit higher to the thoracic fibers of the lat, and then pairing that with a chest supported lumbar row. So then bringing the chest onto something when you are now a little bit more fatigued to prevent you from kind of cheating these reps a little bit. And then the lumbar row is a little bit more where arms are just kind of straight out in front of you and the attachment is much closer there. So that is going to be more of the like middle division of the lat. So I really like thoracic rows. I just really, really enjoy doing. I get like a really good connection with them. I just really enjoy them. And then, after that, I figured for both of these, keeping it somewhere in that like 6 to 8 rep range. And then with the chest supported row or the lumbar row, you can get a really good contraction there with supporting the chest, and you can get really good honest reps out of it. So that I like specifically when I would program that too, is a lot of people like left to their own devices, like don't program a lot of rows, right? So generally when I'm making programs, which are always for males, I take in the account of like, okay, what does every single male do? This is one of the times where I will make like a blanketed statement or thought. You train your chest a shit ton. You do a lot of pull downs, right? People generally don't do a lot of rows, especially like chest supported rows. So I'm going to purposefully program in things that people generally speaking at, in generalizations for the population of people that I work with, typically would not do as much of. So that's where this superset would come into play.
Yeah, totally. Do you ever feel weird in a commercial gym bringing a bench over to like a cable station or something like that?
Yeah,
Or is that just kind of like, I want this bench, I'm going to take it?
No, we've never talked about this on the podcast, but for someone who spent 20 years of his life 5 to 6 days in a week in a gym, I still get incredible gym anxiety, like moving a bench or something like that. Like it is like, I'll think about it the whole way I'm driving there. Like, fuck, I got this program, especially now, like I got this program from Alex. I got to pull those benches over to do the chest supported bilateral row. Everyone's gonna be fucking looking at me. Like, yeah, it doesn't go away. It really doesn't.
Yeah. No, I think about that a lot when I'm programming group program stuff. I'm like, okay, like I really do want them to have this like support here for this pull down, but like how many of the people are going to be like, oh, I'm going to feel weird doing this, and then blah, blah, blah. Like there's all this like chain of effects that happen. But anyway, just interesting aside. So, I struggle with the back superset one a little bit because my brain wants to go short to lengthened. That's what I want to do, but there just isn't like a great way to train the back lengthened. So the closest that we know that we can get to that is like a pull around, which doesn't train it in lengthened overload, but it trains it at long muscle lengths. So that would be kind of my default answer, is to do something like a one arm row that is naturally inherently going to be short overloaded. You could think like using your thoracic cable row would be a great option. And then you could go to either a different region or a different setup and essentially go into like a pull around from that position. So I guess in theory, you could even do it. You could go like thoracic cable row and then shift into the pull around. The only issue is that you're going to have less mechanical advantage when you shift into that pull around. So you potentially would have to drop the weight, which then kind of makes it both a drop set and a superset. So I think that the lats one gets a little weird. It just does. And another thing about that is that doing single arm supersets is also quite cumbersome. I find the same thing with legs, where you're like, oh, I'm going to go like single leg extension to split squat. And then you're like, well, that was really fucking hard. Now I need to do it all over again for the other leg. So for that reason and the practicality piece, I think that the better answer is to go with a 2-armed movement, more along the lines of kind of what you did. And so the one that I've been commonly using in my training for the last couple months, I had it in my metabolite phase, was chest supported T-bar row, but it doesn't have to be a T-bar row. It could be, any kind of row that's going to have more of like that short overload profile, and then going into a chest supported pull down for whichever region of the lat that you want to do. So I think of the pull down, like even though yes, you can train your lats in a row and you could train your upper back in a pull down, I think it is a bit easier to align the lats with like a slightly more vertical nature. Where you tend to align the upper back rear delts more with that like horizontal nature a little bit more, or that like low to high pull. So I like the second movement. If the goal is lats, I want that second movement to be vertical. So that's why I would go from a row initially into like an iliac chest supported pull down. And I would probably do that if I wasn't going to take that into some sort of like partials at the end. I may potentially even raise the weight and just do do the whole lat pull down, the iliac pull down with a partial. So it's like you almost go too heavy because you're already fatigued from the row, and then you just throw weight on that's only going to allow you to get like 60 or 70% of the range of motion. And it almost becomes a reverse drop set. You're just doing it on like a different movement than on the movement you were doing before. It's a very convoluted complex, and hopefully that made some sort of sense to everybody. But that's kind of the way I look at that.
It is convoluted and complex. And if I'm being really honest, the what's the word I'm looking for? The likelihood of me programming a double lat superset it's low. Realistically, it would be like a lat paired with an upper back or a lat paired with a rear delt. if I'm being really honest. But just trying to stick to the trend of the question, honest, right? Or aren't, whatever. Earnest. There we go. That's what I went with. But realistically, it's going to get paired with an upper back or a rear delt more often than not.
My inclination with this sort of thing, like my gut reaction is just to say that you choose a lat movement and then you take it into a reverse drop set or a partial and you just stick with the same movement instead of doing two movements back to back.
Yeah, it's really practical to do that too in the gym.
Yeah. Sweet. Upper back, rear delts. What you got?
So with this, my favorite upper back movement is like a chest supported machine row. This is one I generally won't do in like a cable stack or something like that. Like the prime like upper back row is really, really good here. Something I will even do, any rows that kind of have like a high to low path, I will use a little bit, and I'll set the seat up really high. So, I mean, one thing that I do is I modify almost everything. I'm like, okay, this is what I want. This is the position I want to find. Like, how can I finagle this to get me there? I always have my angles 90 grips. I put D handles around fucking everything to kind of just figure out what I want to do. So kind of a chest supported machine row. Like I did these the other day on like one of those like hammer, row machines that are kind of really shitty for the use case. But I set the seat up all the way. I found the arm path I wanted. I put the D handles around it, and I really like that sensation for upper back, stimulus, because you can be really strong in it, and I find a solid enjoyment in like a chest supported pulling movement where you can feel really strong and really loaded up and put a lot of tension in there. So I really like doing that. And then if I will superset that with a prone incline rear delt DB row. So a very, very similar movement path, but just slightly changing the arm path to make it a little bit more rear delt versus upper back focused.
Yep. Cool. I feel similarly about the upper back rear delts as I did about the lats. Like I kind of feel like my inclination is just to take one movement that I really like and do either like partials or reverse drop set, because then you get that short to lengthen thing. But if being put on the spot here and staying, in earnest with the topic, I think that the one that I endear a lot is going with like a cross cable, almost calling it like a face pull. So you cross the cables like in front of your body, in front of your face like this, and then you pull out and retract. So you're getting a bunch of like more isolated rear delt and upper back than you do when you're actually getting a full elbow flexion in there and like doing a full row. So it's slightly more isolating. And then I would take that as well, just like you said, into some sort of prone chest supported row. I'm not too specific on which one it is. I could do a rear delt dumbbell row, like you said, draped over the back of a bench. I could go over to a chest supported T-bar row machine and do something like that. But essentially going from like a more isolated one with more acute, where you're not, you don't need as much load, and then going directly into one where usually you would use a lot more load, almost like the pre-fatigue type thing.
Yeah, one thing that I am kind of quickly realizing this conversation is turning into is less around like, hey, this is the movement, or this is like the name of the movement to do. It's like, hey, this is this like effect or stimulus I want, and how we basically just like jerry rig things to find that for ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, choosing exact movements seems a little bit limiting. I mean, it's cool that you thought about it that way, I guess. Maybe my brain just doesn't quite work like that, maybe because of the group programming and always having to provide substitutions for people and thinking more globally on like what the exercise is trying to achieve. But it's good. We have both perspectives anyways.
And then moving it, lateral delt. So what I did is I took this one a little bit different. So it's pretty much a superset, but it's like kind of not, basically a lateral delt cast set. So you're going to need one pair of dumbbells here, and then the pairing that with the cross cable behind the back lengthened lateral delt raise. So basically you are going to do a dumbbell lateral raise, try and hold the peak contraction for a 2 count for like 5 to 6, 7 reps. and then immediately go into the lateral delt raises with the cables behind your back, right, for another like 5 to 6, 7 reps, and then back to the DBs again, try and hold for a 2 count. You're probably not going to be able to complete any full reps. It's basically just partials, and those will light you up. But I really, really like performing those.
That is so interesting that the way you frame that cast set, because I've always seen the cast set performed as one movement, right? Like we did it at the practical as leg extensions or as leg curls. But I love how you took the idea and the framework of the cast set and you essentially sandwiched a lengthened movement in the middle there. And very cool. Very cool. I like the way that you did that.
Yeah, so I mean, I would love to say that I take the credit for that, but I actually got this from, I feel really terrible that I can't remember his name. He was at the practical with me. He owns the gym at Prospect, which is in Longmont. Dan. So yeah. I was looking for something on YouTube, and I came across his YouTube channel, and I was like, oh shit, that's Dan from the practical. And then I was watching some things, and I was like, oh man, this is brilliant. And I was like, I'm going to try that tomorrow. And it like lit me up. And then I don't think you can do more than one set, or you have to drastically reduce the weight to pretty much nothing. But it is effective. It's really, really badass. So that one's fun.
That's something I'm going to try at some point for sure. I like that a lot. Well, now I feel like mine is like inferior compared to yours, but for my lateral delt sequence, I love essentially prioritizing the short position of the lateral raise, because we already know that the lateral raise is short. So you decided to prioritize it in yours by doing a 2-second pause at the top. In mine, I'm prioritizing it by avoiding the bottom range of motion. So you take that like 30 degrees where your arms go vertical, and there's basically no stimulus on the lateral delt. So we stop our lateral raises with the arms still kind of out by the sides. And then you just work that like top 70% of the range of motion or whatever. So I'll do those to, 1-0 RIR. And then again, I'll just like you, I'll go over to that behind the back cable lateral raise, because that's the best way to lengthen the medial delt and middle delt rather. And yeah, that's super effective. I love that one. I use it all the time.
Yeah. This moving into glutes. So, I mean, again, this is one that this one is a stretch, right? I'm really never programming supersets for glutes on people. So I really had to take a bit of a stretch here. So in being earnest, one of my favorite glute exercises is a deficit reverse lunge. And I would probably, instead of a superset, just program that with a shorter rest period in between legs there. And because it's a unilateral movement, I would probably just do that, as opposed to trying to put two together. Because I'm never going to program for myself. I'm majorly, almost exclusively work with men. I've had one guy that I can think of who wanted to focus on his glutes. I just never crossed the bridge really, or came to the bridge and needed to cross it essentially. So.
That's a good superset. I mean, they're both lengthened, so that shit is gonna wreck your world. I mean, you are gonna be so sore from that superset. But it looks like it would be productive for like one round until you collapsed. Exactly. So mine, yeah, I'm gonna say mine is one that I'm actually programming in the group programming right now, and everyone loves it. It's basically going cast glute bridge for 8 to 12 reps. And then as soon as you are approaching failure or 1 rep from failure on the glute bridge, then you can increase the mechanical advantage by going into a hip thrust. So you drop a little bit lower and you really use all that power from your hips to accelerate that thing up. And usually you'll find that you get about 4 to 8 reps of hip thrust after you get close to failure on the glute bridge. So for sure, I love that one. And even though both movements are short overloaded, the hip thrust is going to be a little bit more lengthened due to the larger range of motion at the bottom than the glute bridge is. And you kind of are accelerating through, you're getting momentum going essentially. So you're going to get a little bit more out of that lengthened position than you would on the glute bridge. So I'm a big fan of that one, and the group programs have been as well.
Yeah, we did that at the practical. It was awful. It was absolutely
Yeah.
awful. So uncomfortable.
Yep.
Cool. Moving into hamstrings. So one that I would like to do here that is a little bit different because what I basically have here is a seated hamstring curl, which is going to be a little bit more lengthened overload, and then pairing that with a 45-degree hip extension. And then something that I will kind of like you said earlier, you talked about this on the podcast, is kind of doing like partials to really just put more emphasis on the hamstrings, especially in like the lower where you're obviously much more lengthened in the hip extension. I really, really like this one. The reason I really like it is because it's kind of the complete opposite to the prone lying leg curl. Like you can feel really strong and powerful in the seated hamstring curl. So you can kind of like load up a good amount of weight there and get some like good tension through it. However, when that like power output drops off, and because it's lengthened overload, the reps kind of stop really quickly. And then you can go over into the hip extension and it's not as much as like a powerful movement. It's more of like a full range of motion and you're not going to get too much more, but I really do enjoy that superset.
Yeah. So real quick, the seated hamstring curl, it trains at long muscle lengths and it may be lengthened overloaded, but that depends on the machine and how it's calibrated and stuff like that. So if you're having one where you're not able to get out of that stretched position, then it probably is a little bit more lengthened overloaded, as you said. But I think inherently what the seated hamstring curl in most cases is probably still short overloaded. It just trains at long muscle lengths because you're in hip flexion.
Yes, you are correct there. I was
so just a quick clarification.
Yeah, the two that I liked the most, but they were, very much different. They was like the complete opposite. But yeah, I've been on a lot where it's definitely much more shortened, overloaded.
Yeah, for sure. And either way, I think it's still an effective superset. And to be honest, like I have two answers to this question because one of them is the exact one that you said. And in doing so, it would actually, in an ideal world, it would be lying hamstring curl to lengthened partials on 45-degree hip extension. That would be like the my version of yours, because I feel like if you're going to make the hip extension more lengthened by doing the partials at the bottom, then I'd like to potentially have the shorter overloaded knee flexion movement first. But alternatively, you could also do a superset that would like start with where was I going with that? I'm trying to incorporate an RDL into this and I'm confusing myself because I know that I don't want an RDL to be second for the general population. Like this was the conversation we had about Mike Israel's video a number of episodes ago, but like you wouldn't want to take a person that you don't know for sure can handle this from like a leg curl. And then when you're super fatigued, let's go do some hip hinging type thing. But that is like the ideal way that you would structure a superset for going from like short to lengthen. So I think that the hamstring can get weird in that way. And that's where that idea of going from leg curl into like bottom partials on the 45-degree gives you a little bit more of that short to lengthened with a little bit more security and stability from the hip extension machine. And then alternatively, like if you were going to use an RDL in a superset, like I think if you're an advanced athlete and you know your ability and you have perfect technique and all these things, you know, you're not going to compromise under fatigue, you could certainly go leg curl to RDL, maybe like a dumbbell RDL or something that maybe is slightly less loaded than it would be with a barbell. And then alternatively, you could even go RDL to leg curl. And so that would then shift the way you're doing it to go lengthen to short. But like if you're a gen pop person that probably shouldn't be doing the RDL second, then doing it first and going into the leg curl would also be a super effective superset as well. And so I like that one too.
Yeah, I agree there. And in every situation, I'm like, I want to avoid putting a RDL second because it's unrealistic for a majority of people, right? I don't even want to fucking do that. Oh my God, it sounds absolutely awful. So, you know, it was a good point to bring up there of like why we purposefully didn't want to put that there.
Yeah, for sure. Quads.
Yeah, moving into quads, man. So I guess, again, I should preface this on kind of reason why. Personally, I took this particular question personally. And I was like, what do I personally want to do here? So for me, I would say with my quads, my VMO, which is basically like that teardrop on the inside area towards the knee, is my worst part of my developed quad. It's just something I have the hardest time getting a like a mind muscle connection with. So for what I would choose was a leg extensions first. So again, short overloaded movement, and then pair that into like a deep, full range of motion quad biased leg press. So you may or may not be able to do this based on the leg press equipment you have available to you. Something like an Arsenal leg press is pretty damn good. Ones that allow you to get into a much deeper dorsiflexion positioning at the bottom can be good for this, but that like pushing those leg extensions for like a 10 to 12 and then about like an 8 to 10 on the quad based leg press, I really would like doing that.
Yeah, I have the exact same one, like leg extension into a back supported squat machine of some sort. And then I also wrote down, because I just have this really, I do this one. I used to do this one all the time. At some point again, I will, but leg extensions into walking lunges. I mean, it's just awful in like the worst possible way. And, I don't know that I've ever actually like felt my quads feel like they're going to give out and like not actually be able to stand up than what it feels like at the end of that superset. So it's like leg extensions, for 8 to 10 reps, tough set, and then grab the 30s to the 50s. You don't need a ton of weight. Like 30s to 50s is plenty. And by like 8 to 12 reps, like 4 to 6 per leg, it's like fucking death, man. So I highly recommend that one too, especially if you know how to do like a quad dominant lunge and you're not just going to go into like vertical shin mode and use your glutes to get out of the bottom, but you're actually going to like force that quad to do the work and get that knee flexion. It's pretty terrible.
Yeah, that would be awful. I remember it reminded me of that time we did like, me and you trained quads together. I don't know, probably in like 2016, 2017 at this point. And we finished with like 3 minutes of like walking lunges straight. Like I couldn't, I literally had to like lower myself onto the toilet with my arms for like days after that.
Pretty awful, man. Yeah, it's no bueno.
All right, moving into some arms. So this is one where I actually prefer having the lengthened movement first. So it's an overhead cable tricep extension. So again, naming things and explaining them is hard. And the way that I will explain this to people is like, imagine you're a ninja and you have 2 swords strapped to your back and you're pulling both of them out, right? In a cross motion. So that's how
I like that.
Yeah. So that, and then supersetting it with cross cable tricep push down. So another crossed one. So you're going to grab the left cable with your right arm and, vice versa. And then you're going to step back and then basically do a traditional push down, but keeping your elbows out a little bit to the sides and just kind of recreating that X pattern again.
Yeah, mine is the inverse of that. I like doing the cross cable tricep push down first and then flipping over into the overhead and doing the lengthened one second. So yeah, that's a fantastic one. And if you have the access to dual cables, like fucking phenomenal, Yep. And even if you don't, like you can kind of replicate this with like I programmed this one for my group programs because it's just easier than expecting everyone to have a dual cable machine. But just going straight from like a push down and then you just flip over and you go right into overhead extension, with a standard straight bar or a V bar or whatever kind of, normal tricep attachment you like to use.
Yep. I really like that too. And then moving into biceps, again, and just being really transparent, supersetting biceps is something that I commonly am not programming just because I feel like the quality kind of drops off because they're smaller muscle. They kind of fatigue a little bit faster. And two, I'm always kind of afraid they're going to cramp, to be completely honest. And again, it's one of those things where personal bias influences things a little bit. But the one that I will do that I like And this one is one, again, it's really, really practical. A squatting cable bicep curl. So you're basically putting your triceps on the top of your knees. You're sitting in a squat and you're using your knees as kind of like an anchor, kind of like a preacher curl setup. And that's going to be much more shortened, overloaded. And then you go to, 2 reps shy of failure or something like that. And then you stand up and then you just do a standing cable curl, which is going to be a little bit more like mid range.
Love that. I have 2 that are kind of similar. So in the nature of going from short overload to lengthened, I like to start with a spider curl of some sort. And I think that if you're going to use a dumbbell spider curl, then that's cool, because then that allows you to do your lengthened by doing one of those face away cable curls. Whereas if I do a cable spider curl, then I probably will need to do an incline dumbbell curl as my second movement. I mean, I guess in theory I could move the bench out of the way. I could change the weights. I could move over. I could do the thing. Like I could do the whole dance and like use cables for both. But for like practicality and ease of use reasons, I usually would do the spider curl with dumbbells and then the face away curl with cables, or do the spider curl with cables and then do the incline dumbbell curl for the lengthened. And I'm a huge fan of both of those supersets. And, I actually, if left to my own volition and say I wasn't following a like structured program, I think I would incorporate a lot more of these. Like back when I used to train and I was a little less, like I'm talking, 10, 15 years ago, I was a little less stringent on following the program and the diagnostics and all this stuff. Like I'd have a lot of days where I'd be like, I just feel like doing some supersets today. And they would be like dumbbell fly to push-ups and like doing some bicep stuff and tricep stuff and all this stuff. And I feel like there's like a part of me in my neurotype that like really does like doing stuff like that, like tinkering around and trying new stuff and like, going for the novelty or whatever. So I think a lot of these supersets like sound really cool to me. And if I wasn't so focused on having to follow my program and being able to assess progress week to week, like I would love to have a couple months period where I just went in and like freewheeled it and just did a bunch of this stuff. So just for whatever that's worth, like I don't think it's like optimal to do that all the time. You probably could program it into your program in a way where like you got some supersets in that repeated each week and you were able to assess progress with them and stuff like that. But ultimately, like doing straight sets is probably just the most efficient way to roam, and doing this stuff is a little bit extra and potentially unnecessary, but still super fun to talk about and always effective in the moment.
Yeah, what you kind of just said made this thought popped into my head of kind of like the knowledge. Sometimes it's a gift, but it can also be kind of like a curse, because like, oh, I just want to like have fun and do some supersets, but you're like, yeah, but that's not going to move the needle forward type of thing. Whereas like years ago, like me and my friends would just show up and get after it, right? We had horrible programs, but we were having the time of our lives, just like training really fucking hard. And there is parts of me that sometimes wish that like, not that I didn't know what I know now, but like that I could just go back and then just relive some of those days of just literally having fun without the knowledge around the opportunity cost of like, I'm probably not actually making any gains because I'm off my program. It's too much novelty sort of thing. But I agree. I think if you like want to have periods of time where you just really want to have some fun. And I talked about this, man, maybe like a year ago on the podcast around this idea of having like fun 4 to 6 week like bridge programs that are really just like different, or like I said, running one of the Mountain Dog John Meadows programs is like a 5 to 6 week like bridge program where it's just different. It's a lot of like atypical type movements and stuff, but it really, it's an enjoyment factor sort of thing. So I think like maybe periods of maintenance, or where you're even in a surplus, where you know that your recovery capacity is really, really high to really just do some maybe higher than would normally be recommended volume or something like that for brief periods, just from a pure enjoyment standpoint. Yeah,
totally. Ignorance is bliss, man. Back in those days, it was just It was fun to just go in there and kill it. And like, you know, whatever I feel like doing today or whatever superset I read about in the magazines or heard on Eat, Train, Prosper podcast, like that's the one I'm going to implement today, you know? So I very much vibe with that. And I've been so structured with my training for so long that I think I'm probably due for one of these like more free periods here in the next year or two. So hopefully we'll still be podcasting and I can talk about it when it happens.
I don't see any reason we wouldn't be. The last kind of thing I will add here is we didn't include calves or abs in the supersets. Realistically, like, I mean, you have to be some level of masochist to want to superset either of those. And to be completely honest, I couldn't superset abs. Like my abs would cramp. They are incredibly deconditioned to the point where I'm almost embarrassed, but I just couldn't do it. They would completely lock up. It would be hell on earth for me. So if you...
Is Alex making you do abs?
Yeah. And I told myself, like, okay. So something that I don't think I talked about this, and maybe we'll cover it more in the next time, but I have this thing where like I'm paying him, I'm going to do what he says, sort of thing. But yeah, I think I have like, I don't know, maybe 8 sets over the week. And realistically, I'm probably going to have to start. It's like one exercise on 2 different days, a total of 8 sets. I'm probably going to have to cut it in half to start because I
that sounds like a lot of ab volume, to be honest.
Well, it's just 4 sets.
8 sets a week. Yeah, but yeah. I mean, shit, dude, I do 2 each session, 2 or 3.
That's what I'm saying. Like I'm gonna start with 2 because anytime, literally the other day I did the GHD curl ups. I did 3 sets, 5, 5, 5, and on my 3rd set, right as I finished and got off, my whole shit fucking locked up.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's bad. So I think I just have to like really only train him with like a 4 RIR or something because I don't know, it's interesting. But yeah, we're not supersetting abs. I probably wouldn't recommend you superset abs, especially. And this is something that I'll have this conversation with clients, and this is the thing we'll wrap up with really quickly. Train your abs like you train other muscle groups, right? Take them through flexion and extension. You don't need to be doing 50 fucking flutter kicks and a bunch of other things, or just train them isometrically and stuff. Take them through flexion and extension under some load if you can, and just try and progress them from there. And they will hypertrophy just like every other muscle that you have. Anything from you, Bryan?
No, that's awesome. I think we have some good topics for next week too, since we didn't get to them on earlier today. So we're all set and glad to be back in the regular routine, man.
Yep, me as well. So as always, guys, thank you for listening. Bryan and I will talk to you next week.